My name is Rachel Wynn. I'm 34 years old and I live in Seattle. Last Friday, I found myself sitting at a long white linen table in a downtown restaurant, half listening to a speech my father was giving about my younger brother's latest research award. The room was full of soft lighting, crystal glasses, and polite laughter that didn't quite reach me. It was Liam's engagement dinner. My parents had reserved an entire private room at a place with a wine list longer than my resume. They were proud, glowing, really, and they had every reason to be. Liam is the kind of son you put in holiday cards, all Ivy League and breakthroughs, the kind of son whose achievements get printed and framed. And I was there. Someone handed me a champagne flute. I smiled and thanked them, even though I hate champagne. It fizzes too much and feels like it's trying too hard to impress. Across the table, my aunt asked me if I had finally figured out what I wanted to do. I told her I was working in tech. She nodded like that, explained everything and nothing at all. I watched my brother and his fiancée make a toast. They looked perfect together. Her ring sparkled just enough to say everything her words didn't have to. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye, whispering something about how proud she was. I don't think she even realized I was sitting 2 seats away. I used to think it was just in my head, that I was imagining the distance, the polite silence. But sitting there, ignored while they praised every inch of my brother's life, it hit me again like it always does. Some people become invisible not because they fade, but because no one ever bothered to really look in the first place. That was the night everything changed. But not because I tried to make it, because I didn't. My parents have always been people of measurable success. My mother is a law professor who speaks at conferences and intimidates entire classrooms with a single raised eyebrow. My father was a trauma surgeon until he transitioned into hospital administration, where he now manages a team with clinical precision and zero room for sentiment. My brother Liam was born with their blueprint in his veins. He never colored outside the lines, first in his class captain of something, recipient of awards that had their own press releases. My parents never missed a moment to celebrate him. Framed certificates went up faster than wallpaper in our house. Every dinner felt like a debrief on his excellence. When I was 15, I built a scheduling tool for the school nurse's office. She loved it, said it saved her hours. I printed out the code and left it on the kitchen counter next to my dad's coffee mug, hoping he'd ask about it. He moved it aside like junk mail, then picked up the sports section. There were small attempts over and over, like when I taught myself Java during spring break and showed my mom a demo of a health tracking app I'd made. She didn't look up from her laptop, just said I should consider law. Something secure, something real. I didn't know how to say that real to me meant making things. That stability to me looked like freedom. Liam, meanwhile, was solving equations for fun and shadowing doctors at 17. He brought home anatomy flashcards, and my parents hovered like bees to honey. They'd ask him questions, test him at the dinner table beam, when he answered like a future neurosurgeon. When they turned to me, it was with a polite smile and a question about SAT prep or whether I was still spending too much time on my laptop. Once I won a statewide tech fair, built a prototype for a hospital communication dashboard that ended up in a regional newsletter. My mom said I should wear more fitted clothes next time so I'd look more professional in photos. My dad said something about not getting too distracted from the big picture, like college admissions. I remember holding the glass award in the hallway that night and feeling like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't just about being different. It was about being illegible to them. They understood Liam. He was everything they knew how to love. I was a language they never tried to learn. Every time I brought up something I was building, they'd nod vaguely, then steer the conversation toward law school timelines or stable career ladders. It always ended with the same line: just have a backup plan. That phrase clung to me like static. Backup plan. As if what I wanted was a risk they couldn't afford to see succeed. So I stopped showing them things. I stopped inviting them in. Not out of spite, out of preservation, because nothing hurts, quite like being looked at with love that doesn't see you, see. In high school, I stayed after class most days to work on a web app that helped teachers track attendance and homework more easily. I didn't build it for credit or competition. I built it because the system was clunky and I knew I could fix it. When it won second place at a regional tech challenge, I brought home the certificate and set it on the dining room table. My mom asked if I'd filled out the scholarship forms for pre-law summer camp. My dad said I should volunteer more so colleges would see me as well-rounded. No one asked what the app did. Liam got into an early admission program for biomedical research, and they threw him a backyard cookout with lights and catered food. Neighbors came, our aunt flew in. I served drinks and offered congratulations with a practiced smile while my certificate sat untouched in my room. By junior year, I'd stopped sharing updates. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the silence afterward felt heavier than any scolding would. I remember slipping a printed mock-up of a project pitch into my dad's briefcase. It was about improving communication between pharmacies and hospitals. He brought it home with a coffee stain across the cover and never mentioned it. I worked late in the computer lab most nights. Not because anyone expected me to, but because that space made sense. Code responded. Systems could be fixed. I wrote scripts in Python until my wrists ached and my eyes blurred. None of it was seen, but all of it mattered. Liam got into Yale. There were banners taped to the front porch. My mother bought champagne. I overheard her call a friend and say she never worried about him, that he was destined for big things. I sat upstairs with a debugging console on my screen and a quiet storm building inside my chest. In college, I chose a small tech-focused school on the West Coast, far from home, far from their voices. The distance wasn't just miles, it was space I needed to breathe. Even then, they called and asked if I was eating well, if I was applying to law school like we'd talked about. I told them I was busy. They told me to stay practical. I won a campus award for innovation after I and a classmate created a scheduling system used in 3 local clinics. It made the rounds in a university newsletter. I forwarded it to my mom. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was when something shifted. Not in them. In me. I stopped hoping they'd care. I stopped waiting for that phone call where they'd finally say they were proud. The one where my dad would ask how the algorithm worked. The one where my mom would say she'd shown it to her colleagues. I stopped needing it. I started storing trophies in boxes instead of shelves. I labeled them by month and shoved them under my bed. The victories still meant something, just not to them. Liam was doing clinical rotations by then. He sent photos from the hospital with captions about saving lives. My parents shared them in Christmas cards. My name was listed with no title, just Rachel, living in Seattle, between projects. I told myself it was fine, that the work was its own reward, that I didn't need applause, but deep down there was still a part of me that wanted to be seen. I poured everything into my work. I stayed up building prototypes with friends who saw me for what I was. I started leading student teams, pitching ideas at hackathons, and freelancing for local health orgs. Still, every time I reached for the phone to share something, I stopped. There was no one on the other end who would understand. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something quieter, more solid, like a root growing deep, not needing the sun above. I wasn't trying to make them see me. I was building so well that one day they wouldn't be able to look away. That thought carried me through each setback, each moment of doubt, each lonely weekend when everyone else went home and I stayed to work. It wasn't revenge. It was conviction. I didn't want them to hurt. I just didn't want to keep hurting every time they looked past me. By the time I graduated, I had 2 offers from startups and a prototype being considered for state funding. I didn't mention any of it when my mom asked what I was doing next. I told her I was figuring it out. It was easier than hearing her suggest I apply to grad school. That summer, I moved into a tiny apartment and started CareSync with Mila. No press, no announcement, no celebration, just a notepad full of sketches and a rented server. I had finally stopped chasing their recognition. And without that weight, I could finally run. Mila and I met during junior year in a back-end systems class. She had a blunt way of speaking that caught people off guard, but it matched the sharpness of her mind. We bonded over frustration. Hers came from losing her grandfather to a misread prescription interaction. Mine came from watching my grandmother get bounced between specialists who never seemed to share a chart. We'd sit in the student center until it closed, sketching out ideas between cups of coffee that tasted like cardboard. The first version of CareSync was nothing more than a shared document and a dream, a clean interface that allowed patients, providers, and pharmacies to see the same information in real time. We started building it out of her parents' garage. They gave us a table, a dusty space heater, and more encouragement than I'd felt in years. They brought us sandwiches, asked real questions about our process. Her dad once fixed a broken extension cord so we could keep all our monitors running during a winter storm. We coded past midnight most nights. I used leftover grant money to pay for server space. Mila skipped a paid internship to stay with the project. We lived off microwaved noodles and adrenaline. My parents thought I was freelancing, that I was in between things. Every time I tried to explain what we were doing, their eyes glazed over. So eventually I stopped trying. There were nights when nothing worked. A bug we couldn't track down, a hospital system that rejected our formatting. We'd slam our laptops shut in frustration and walk to the corner store for soda, then come back and try again. Not because we had to, because we believed in it. When we landed our first beta user, a community clinic just outside Tacoma, it felt surreal. They had no budget but agreed to pilot our system for internal scheduling. We sat in on meetings, took notes, fixed bugs in real time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. The first time a nurse said it saved her 20 minutes per patient, I nearly cried. It was the kind of validation I didn't know I still needed. We printed every email that mentioned words like efficient or improvement or thank you, taped them to the garage wall like tiny medals. Mila started calling it our quiet trophy case. In our first year, we won a small entrepreneurship award from the state. It came with $5,000 and a handshake from someone in a blazer who mispronounced both our names. We didn't care. We used the money to upgrade servers and buy a secondhand couch from a neighbor. When I told my mom about it, she asked if I had considered taking the LSAT just in case. I told her I hadn't thought about it. That was the truth. I hadn't thought about it in over a year. Our apartment was barely livable. The ceiling in the bathroom leaked when it rained, and the heater sounded like a lawnmower. But we made it work. The hallway walls were lined with dry erase boards, ideas scribbled at every odd hour. Tyler joined us that spring, a dropout from a big-name school who could build back-end frameworks in his sleep. He didn't care about titles or stock options. He just believed in the problem we were trying to solve. That summer, we made a breakthrough with encrypted data sharing between departments. It was a small innovation, but it got attention. A professor Mila had stayed in touch with introduced us to Dr. Kennedy, an administrator at a regional hospital in Spokane. Dr. Kennedy didn't wear a suit or speak in buzzwords. She listened to our pitch, asked smart questions, and ended the meeting by saying, "Let's try it for 30 days. Those 30 days changed everything. CareSync was installed in a single department first, radiology. We showed up daily sometimes just to fix a typo or show a nurse how to log in faster. We watched how people used it, what they ignored, what they loved. At the end of the trial, Dr. Kennedy extended it to 3 more departments. 2 months later, we had a contract, our first paying client. We didn't throw a party. We ordered pizza and sat on the garage floor in silence, just taking it in. That night, I checked my inbox, nothing from my parents, just a promotional email from a law school I never applied to. I closed my laptop and looked around that garage. Cracked walls, open code on half a dozen screens, the smell of solder and cardboard in the air. We were building something that mattered. And for the first time, I didn't care who saw it. I just wanted to keep going. We weren't waiting to be discovered. We were discovering who we were, one update, one contract, one solved problem at a time. The room was humming with soft conversation and the quiet clinking of silverware when Amanda's voice cut through it. She had been looking at me with this slight frown like she was working through a puzzle she couldn't quite place. Then she tilted her head and said my full name, not just Rachel, but Rachel Wynn, with this slow realization in her voice that pulled the air right out of the room. It got quiet fast. Forks hovered mid-air. A waiter froze behind my father's chair, still holding the wine bottle. My mother blinked like she hadn't heard right, and Liam let out a nervous laugh that didn't land anywhere. Amanda asked if I was the Rachel Wynn behind CareSync. Not the name, not the job title, but the company. The same one she had apparently been in negotiations with for 6 weeks. Her eyes widened before anyone else's did, but everyone followed. One by one, heads turned to me. I kept my voice steady when I said yes. Just that. No more, no less. Amanda looked stunned, her napkin clutched in one hand, like it had just hit her that I wasn't who she thought I was, and maybe no one else at that table really knew either. Liam looked between the two of us. He said there must be some mistake. He told her I worked in tech support. Something vague, something forgettable. Amanda didn't even blink. She said no. Rachel is the co-founder and CEO of the platform your hospital board is considering for full integration. Then she turned to me and added that her entire team had been raving about our back-end system for weeks. The silence that followed was the kind you don't forget. It pressed in like fog. My father's wine glass hung mid-air. My mother's mouth was slightly open, but nothing came out. I took a sip of water. Not because I needed it, but because I could. Liam asked if it was true. Not in anger, just disbelief. Like he didn't know what planet he'd landed on. I told him yes, that we started in a garage, that we now worked with over 200 hospitals across the country, that the system they were evaluating was ours. My uncle, who'd barely said 3 words to me all evening, leaned in and asked if I had investment advice. My mother said she always knew I had potential, especially with computers. My dad started a story about how I used to take apart our modem as a kid. I didn't respond to any of it. I watched them try to rewrite the past in real time. I saw it on their faces, how they scrambled to recalibrate to turn this moment into a reflection of their support, as if it had been there all along. I let them. Liam went quiet, not withdrawn, just still. He watched me like he was seeing something he couldn't quite fit into the version of me he had always known. At one point, he reached for his wine and missed the glass completely. His hand just rested on the tablecloth. After dessert, Amanda pulled me aside near the windows. She apologized, said she didn't mean to put me on the spot. I told her she hadn't, that this moment was always going to come. Whether here or later, it was inevitable. She looked at me with something like respect. Not just for the work, but for the fact that I'd built something real, while no one in my own family had seen it happening. She said her team talked about CareSync like it was the future, that now she understood why it was guarded so closely. I thanked her, and I meant it, not for the recognition, but for seeing the work for what it was, and not what my last name suggested it should have been. As we left the restaurant, my parents offered to walk out with me. I said I'd take the long way. I needed the air, needed space to stretch this moment out without anyone trying to repackage it. That night, I didn't cry or celebrate. I didn't replay it over and over in my head. I just sat on my couch, shoes off, lights dim, and let the stillness settle in. For years, I had imagined a moment like this, the reveal, the recognition, the shift. But standing in it, I realized something unexpected. I didn't need it like I used to, because the most powerful part wasn't that they finally saw me. It was that I had kept going even when they didn't. The Drake was quiet for a Saturday, just a few couples in the corner and a waiter polishing glasses behind the bar. My parents were already seated when I walked in, dressed like they had a meeting afterward, not brunch with their daughter. My mother stood halfway, smiled like we were strangers meeting for the first time. My father offered an awkward hug, the kind that felt rehearsed. I sat down, folded my napkin over my lap, and waited. They asked how I'd been, even though it hadn't been 48 hours. My mother said she'd been reading everything, the articles, the funding rounds, the awards. She said it was remarkable. Her voice caught on that word. Then came the question, why didn't you tell us I stirred my coffee? Looked up. Because the last time I tried, you told me to apply for a job answering phones. My father shifted in his seat, already preparing his defense. That's not fair. We were trying to help. No, I said. You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken. My mother looked down, picked at the edge of her plate. We just didn't understand. Tech moves so fast, it felt unstable. And medicine doesn't, I asked. That's different, she said. Those are structured, predictable, safe. I nodded slowly. That's what scared you. I chose something you couldn't control. My father exhaled through his nose like he was trying not to lose ground. But you're clearly brilliant. We always knew that. No, I said it gently. You knew what you wanted me to be. That's not the same as knowing me. The waiter came by to refill our water. It gave us a pause we needed. I stared out the window for a moment, then turned back. I spent years building something I loved. Every time I tried to tell you about it, it felt like screaming into a storm. So eventually I stopped. My mother blinked quickly like the words stung, but she didn't want to show it. We thought you were lost. I wasn't. I just wasn't yours to direct anymore. The table went still. No one reached for their coffee. The silence was different now. Not cold, not angry, just honest. We love you. She said it quietly like it still carried weight. I know, but love without respect doesn't feel like love. My father looked away first, out the window, like the street had more answers than I did. He nodded once, then again slower. We never meant to make you feel small. You didn't mean to, but you did. That's the part I had to work through. He looked back at me. I'm glad you did, even if it wasn't with us. The rest of brunch was quieter, less posture, more questions, real ones. They asked about Mila, about how we got our first contract. My mom admitted she read a blog post about startup culture but didn't understand most of it. I told her that was normal. Even we don't understand half the acronyms some days. There were no sudden tears, no dramatic apologies, just a slow unraveling of assumptions, one thread at a time. When we left, they said they wanted to try again, that maybe next week we could meet for dinner. I said, okay, because I believed them, not fully, not yet, but enough to see what might come next. Healing doesn't always start with forgiveness. Sometimes it starts with clarity. with two people sitting across a table and finally telling the truth. He showed up 2 nights later with a bottle of Cabernet in a bakery box, said he'd tried baking but gave up halfway and bought backup. I smiled and let him in, already feeling the shift in the air. We sat on the floorbacks against my couch just like we used to when we were kids. The skyline flickered outside the window, a soft hum rising from the street below. He poured the wine into mismatched glasses and didn't try to fill the silence right away. I waited not out of coldness but out of space. Let him find his words. When he finally spoke, it wasn't rehearsed. "I need to say this," he said. "I believed what they believed, that you were lost, that you had missed your shot. I never asked, and that's on me." His voice cracked a little, not enough to break, just enough to feel real. I told him he wasn't the only one, but he was the only one sitting here now. He looked down at the glass in his hand, said he felt ashamed, said he realized that while he was racking up degrees and accolades, I was quietly building something that changed lives. I told him I didn't need him to be proud, I just needed him to see me. And tonight he did. We talked for hours. Not about medicine or startups, about childhood, about how we both carried versions of ourselves shaped by our parents' expectations, about how hard it was to let those go. He asked about the garage, about how we got our first client, about what it felt like to be in the room when someone said yes after years of silence. I answered. Not to impress him, just to share it finally. At one point, he leaned back and laughed, said all this time I thought I was the one doing the meaningful work. I told him he was, that saving lives came in different forms. He nodded and didn't argue. The night thinned out slowly like a soft exhale, no grand declarations, just two siblings sitting in the quiet learning each other again. He raised his glass near the end. "To the black sheep," he said. I clinked mine against his, "To the black sheep who built an empire." We both laughed. It was a small sound, but it filled the whole room. 6 months after the dinner, everything looked different. Not in a headline kind of way, but in the soft daily shifts that meant the most. CareSync had joined Horizon's health tech group, and I stepped into a role that felt both daunting and right. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. Some mornings I just stood there, coffee in hand, remembering the garage where we started. No heat, no titles, just belief. My mother now sends me screenshots of articles about women in tech. Sometimes she asks if I know them, sometimes she says they remind her of me. My father sat through a full product demo last month. He asked questions, not because he followed every word, but because he finally understood that it mattered to me. Liam checks in more now, not as a formality but out of care. Sometimes he sends updates about a patient who used our platform, and sometimes I send back one-line replies with a quiet smile. I started hosting mentorship dinners for girls in STEM. No big speeches, just food stories and space to talk without filters. One night, a high school junior stayed behind and asked me if I ever wished they had believed in me sooner. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window and let the question land. Then I told her the truth. There's power in building alone. Recognition fades, conviction stays.